In the 1980s, Glasgow was struggling with a reputation for organised crime and gang warfare. One key figure in the city's underworld was Arthur Thompson, the man often described as Glasgow's godfather.
Arthur Thompson was very much the old guard. He'd come up in the 40s and 50s. He was the friend of the Crays in London, but he was very much the old style kind of Glasgow criminal.
In the 80s, one young man was building a fearsome reputation that attracted the attention of Thompson. His name was Paul Ferris, and he would soon be a key figure in Thompson's criminal empire.
Paul Ferris was a well-known criminal, a violent man by his own admission. You've got to remember, this man was feared around the country.
He became part of Arthur Thompson's gang and became known as an enforcer. An enforcer is somebody who will do the hard work, the violent work, who will go out and threaten and, when necessary, mete out the violence.
By the early 90s, Thompson's oldest son, Arthur Jr., known as Fat Boy, was rising up the ranks to take over from his father.
Arthur Thompson Jr. went into the family business. From what I understand, not a chip off the old block at all. He wasn't even a shaving off of that block. He didn't have the respect, he didn't command the respect in the life that his father had and still did. Paul Ferris was a contemporary, if you like, of Arthur Thompson Jr., so they had worked together in the business, but they had, from what I understand, a falling out. Paul Ferris blamed Arthur Thompson for essentially fitting him up on a charge which led to a conviction.
On the 18th of August 1991, Arthur Thompson Jr. was shot outside the family home.
Mr. Thompson, serving an 11-year sentence for possessing heroin with intent to supply, was home and leave from Northern-side Open Prison near Forfar. He was shot while walking the short distance from his parents' house to his own home at Proven Mill Road, Black Hill, late on Saturday night.
We are making an appeal to members of the public who may have been in the area of Proven Mill Road about between 11 o'clock and 11:30 on Saturday night to come forward, may have seen something.
Paul Ferris was living in England at the time, but had travelled to Glasgow that night.
Ferris was implicated in that crime. It was alleged that he did the shooting because he had fallen out with the family. Mr. Ferris naturally denied it.
There was a heavy police presence here at Glasgow Sheriff Court this afternoon when 28-year-old Paul Ferris appeared before Sheriff Alexander Eccles. Ferris of Huggenfield Street in Black Hill is alleged to have gunned down convicted drugs dealer Arthur Thompson outside his home in Proven Mill Road on August the 17th. The charge states that Ferris repeatedly discharged a loaded firearm at Arthur Thompson and shot him in the head and body, whereby he was so severely injured he died afterwards in hospital, and that he murdered him.
On the day of Arthur Thompson Jr.'s funeral, Paul Ferris's known associates, Bobby Glover and Joe Hanlon, were found dead in a car.
It was claimed that the two men were involved in the hit, as it was, and that this was quite a stunning piece of theatricality on the part of somebody. Certainly added grist to the mill for the press and the media in general, because this was Glasgow's gangland at its best or worst, depending on which way you look at it.
Detectives investigating the gangland killings of 3 men in Glasgow have warned that a violent feud among the city's drug dealers could lead to more assassinations.
Police say residents have been warned not to help them with their inquiries into the murders.
We know for a fact that the close family of a recent murder victim have been told, do not cooperate with the police.
In March 1992, Paul Ferris's trial for the murder of Arthur Thompson Jr. began.
Mr. Ferris is charged with 10 offences, including murder, attempted murder and a contravention of the Misuse of Drugs Act. He denies all charges.
Being in court for that trial was quite interesting. Also, the people that were there. I mean, there were a lot of men with broad faces and no neck and tight haircuts. Some of those faces were no strangers to the fist or the blade, and they were listening intently to what was being said, leaning forward and wee comment here and there. And, most of the public gallery was filled with people like that.
Arthur Thompson Sr. was a key witness at the trial.
The 61-year-old witness, who describes himself as unemployed and on sickness benefit for 2 years, was told by Mr. Finlay it might be suggested he arranged or orchestrated the deaths of Joe Hanlon and Bobby Glover in revenge for his son's death. When asked what he had to say to that, Mr. Thompson replied angrily, "I would say I was on trial here the way you're going." Looking at the dock, he added, "That is the dock. This is the witness box."
The main prosecution witness in the trial also proved to be controversial.
The main point of evidence seemed to be that of a man called Woodman, who it turned out was something of a supergrass and had given evidence in 5 or 6 other trials in England. And what he said was that they were together in the segregation unit in Berlin prison. So they're in separate cells. They can't see each other. They can't see outside. They don't know what's going on outside either. But according to the testimony, during this period of time, Paul Ferris confessed to killing Arthur Thompson Jr. Now, Paul Ferris was an experienced guy in the life. He knew his way around. I cannot believe that somebody like him would confess to a complete stranger who he can't even see by shouting out to him without knowing who is standing outside his door, listening or recording what's being said. I just can't accept that. And yet, this was led as evidence, and a very important evidence in the prosecution's case. Who thought that was a good idea?
Over 300 witnesses were called to give evidence in the 54-day trial that cost £4 million, making it the longest, most expensive trial in Scottish history at the time.
The thing about this trial, and the thing about a lot of these trials, is it was peppered with liars and half-truths. There was so many people, giving evidence and telling lies that it would be difficult to get through to the truth. The poor jury must have been scratching their head sometimes as to, did that happen? Is that the case? Was this true? And having to come to some sort of decision.
The day started quietly outside the court, but in the near certainty of the end of the trial, people started to gather on the edge of Glasgow Green facing the court.
After 24 hours, the jury acquitted Paul Ferris of the murder of Arthur Thompson Jr.
Paul Ferris emerged into the sunlight on the steps of the High Court in Glasgow for the first time since his arrest 6 months ago.
I'm just glad that the jury vindicated me for the charges, and I think basically a public inquiry is in order.
I think they reached the correct decision, because the evidence just wasn't there.
What plans do you have now? What are you planning to do now, Paul? Enjoy myself.
That sort of public money should not be thrown away. And it was thrown away. If they've really believed that Paul Ferris was guilty of murder, then they should have got better evidence than they did. To have a trial of that length, to cost that amount of money, to have the evidence being presented being so weak, I think the only word you can use is scandal.
It's nearly 30 years since Arthur Thompson Jr. was shot, and his murder case remains unsolved. Paul Ferris says he has now turned his back on a life of crime.